So I have to start off, congratulations. We're reaching 2 years of Star Trek now. So
Yeah.
before we kind of dive in on the Pleroma arc, I just want to say congratulations. How is it feeling to be 2 years into this journey? What's been the highlight so far?
I mean, it's been absolutely incredible. You know, like, we are Star Trek fans first and foremost, so being able to bring this vision, this kind of story that we've had gestating inside of us for so many years to life, and then having the reaction be so positive, top to bottom. You know, all we need to do is show this book to a Star Trek fan, and they're an instant fan. And that means that's so gratifying to us to be able to bring that back to the community and pay it forward in such a way that we can kind of give everyone a big Star Trek hug, even as we are stabbing them in the heart.
Yes, I really think that underlines, I think, a core reason why we do this at all, which is that, like, we both love Star Trek desperately, right? We hear a lot from people like, oh, you can really tell these books are written by fans, which I think sometimes can feel like a backhanded compliment, because sometimes a book written by a fan is fan fiction, and like, we're really trying to make sure that this feels like Star Trek, like that this is like official, like actual canonical Star Trek. So how do we make sure that it both feels like that and feels like it's infused with love? We just try to throw everything that we felt Star Trek taught us back onto the page. It really is about paying back a franchise that helped shape us as young people, and now here we are, hopefully extending that to the next generation, extending that on and paying it back. And so it feels very natural. It's the most natural book in the world to write. Every time we're like, oh man, is this going to be hard to write? It's like, never. Star Trek is easy to write because these characters live rent-free in our head. They have our whole lives, and now we have this great ability to express them and this great opportunity to express them in new ways and to push them in new spaces. So I think, in terms of like my favorite thing about it, it genuinely is just meeting Star Trek fans who come and say, like, I've never read a comic before. Now I'm into comics. Or a comics fan being like, I've never watched Star Trek before, but now I'm into Star Trek. Like, both of those things are such important, beautiful little crossover moments that something like a comic is designed to do, and so rarely gets to do. So we've really just been super gratified by the response.
And where we were kind of a year ago, we were talking Day of Blood. That's where we were, and it's hard to believe it's been a year since that. But now here we are, Pleroma arc. Huge, just massive. Where did this start from? How? Well, yeah, that's my next question: is how and why?
Yeah, so Pleroma's been on table since moment one. In fact, if you go
back to Star Trek Year 5.
Yeah, if you go back to our very earliest stuff in Star Trek, we were very interested in the way that gods and quote unquote gods and people interacted. We had last night the editor-in-chief at IDW turned to us and said, "Do you guys think a lot about God when you're writing Star Trek?" And truthfully, we do.
We'd had some cocktails.
But truthfully, you do, because not because it's a particularly religious thing. In fact, Star Trek is sort of very specifically secularist, but I think what it does do is it takes the idea of gods and interrogates it under this lens of, like, are they actually people? Are they actually just people with sufficiently advanced technology? What does that mean to be a god? How does it mean to transition from being a normal person to having omniscience? Like, what is all that? And the more that we knew that we were going to center this on Sisko, and the more that especially once we understood Kahless and his sort of counterpoint to Sisko, then it really became important for us to say, okay, at some point or another, we need these characters to go meet the gods where they live. And so for years, literally years now, we've had this code word we called Godmoot. We're like, I don't know, there's going to be a Godmoot arc. We don't really know what it is, but we know that there's going to be a Godmoot arc, and it's going to need to bring these characters together at a time that really makes sense. And that's the one where we get all the cameos, and we get to show you all these characters, and we really just like, no. It'll be a blast. But we never knew when it was going to be appropriate, and doing it too early would have really wrecked everything. So we were like, let's just let it be there, and we'll come to it as we come to it. And it was around the time that we got out of Day of Blood and started looking at what the book could be leading into what's coming next after Star Trek 500. And in looking at, like, the area between those two things, we had opportunity basically to tell two long stories. And one, we wanted just to be a very Star Trek story. No gods, no monsters. Well, lots of monsters, I suppose. But, like, no gods. Very much about First Contact and about Romulans and the Federation and deep lore and the Zenkethi and, like, all, you know, what it means to be a captain and what it means to lose crew members and all this, like, very Star Trek stuff.
Getting really into the Starfleet of it all in a way that, like, obviously the Theseus has kind of been on its own journey. So having Sisko be specifically tasked for a start, one for you, one for us, bud. Get out there. Just felt really, really incredible to be able to tell a very kind of grounded and core Star Trek story. But that was the meal, and then we earned ourselves a little treat.
Absolutely.
Then it was like, all right, great, we've taken that as far as we can. We've said what we need to say about Sisko and Starfleet. Now we got to turn him back to the main plot, which is a story about gods. And if we're going to do that, then the Pleroma arc becomes the exact way to do that, and it becomes this really great opportunity for us to just embrace. And that's really how that came about. It's genuinely been like something earmarked in the plan since moment one. We knew we'd need it.
Well, and there's just something so powerful, personally, in taking all these gods, you know, like when the Enterprise encounters Metron, right? Like when you meet Apollo, like this is very specifically a god looking down on these tiny insignificance. But you put all those guys in a room together, they're just a bunch of catty jerks, right? Like it's like getting back to your like high school reunion, and you're just like, oh, you again? And it's like you are both omnidimensional beings, but you can still be that kind of just a brat. And I think that really highlights the fact that these are just people.
Yeah, underneath it, they're just people with sufficiently advanced technology. That's all that's going on here.
And then you go, you know, you take the Theseus outside of space and time and everything, and end up in this realm that is completely, can be whatever you want, your wildest. How do you come up with that?
Well, so part of it, we keep saying sufficiently advanced technology, right? Yeah. We wanted to demonstrate it. These things don't have starships that are visible. Whenever a god is experienced in Star Trek, they look like beings of light, or they snap and it's a flash or whatever, right? And our posit to that is what this is a tricorder in 30,000 years, or 3 million years, or 3 billion years, however long evolution takes, right? Like what turning glowing and arriving somewhere else is just a starship in 3 billion years, right? The technology is simply just advanced to the degree that to us it looks like magic. It looks like godliness, but it is in fact just that. And so what we said was effectively the way we thought about the Pleroma was it's a space station. It's just a space station. It's a thing that is built by these people that manifests as a thing that works for them, that does a certain job and keeps them effectively protected from that which is not good for them, which is linear space and time, all of the various things they're trying to fix. Like it's a quarantine zone that lets them sit protected away from that and affect the world outside.
It's our little green room.
It's DS9 for gods, right? That's all. And so we said like it was that, and then it was the idea that like, okay, well then somebody needs to be generating that, and then everybody needs to be helping. And so once we knew that, we were like, great, all right, well then Aegis gets to generate it because we know Aegis is in the center of our story. We've set them up at year 5. We know that they have this kind of ability. We've even seen their kind of outside space-time stuff in Star Trek year 5, 19, I think it was, which was our Gary 7 prequel issue. 17. Like we've already seen this before many years ago, and so it was a great chance for us to come back to that and say, well, if you zoom out, you'd see Metron and Apollo and all these other things, and they can all be here if they need to be here to sustain this place.
And then underneath that, there is still this really strong sense of family, which is just so inherently Trek. You can do the big thing, you can do the big theology thing, you can break the universe, but then you bring it back to Sisko, as you just kind of said, and this idea of his legacy and where he needs to go, given where we've seen him come from the end of DS9 to now, and then Beverly's story as well, which so timely, given, I don't want to spoil anything, but if you've seen...
We're aware. We've been aware for a long time.
How, like, the timing on that is just crazy, but...
That's kismet, right? Like,
some of it's kismet, and some of it's not. It's really nice. A lot of the time what we're given is just enough information to make some decisions without all of the information. Prodigy is one of those shows that has been very directly accessible to us. They have actually worked very directly with us on this book before, like when we introduced the proto drive in issue 6. That was literally a thing where we had to get on with their writer's room and be like, okay, so what's the timeline on this? Can B'Elanna have worked on it? If B'Elanna worked on it, can Scotty have worked on it? Can we make sure that it gets in the Theseus and that's the prototype? And they were like, great, we'll backfill that into the show. And then when we started talking about...
the Protostar engine, is found.
And then when we started utilizing the idea of Wesley, the exact same thing came up, which was, okay, be aware that they're using Wesley as well. And it's like, well, that's fine because our Wesley is many decades later. In fact, perhaps maybe centuries later. Very hard to tell. And so what we do is we say, great, everything that they're doing is canon and we don't need to touch it. By the time we're catching the character, he's a much older man and he's gone through a lot more. And it meant that we had this great passive connectivity without them having to sit over our shoulders like a licensor and be like, what are you doing? Or us having to sit over their shoulders and be like, what are you doing? It gives us both freedom to act, which is something that Star Trek's actually been really good at recently. I think the last few years, all of these little silos and pods were siloed off enough, but not so much. If we have a question, we can talk to Terry Vitalis. If we have a question, we can talk to Mike McMahon. Well, we come back to Mike McMahon's like one of our friends.
We all snuck into the Star Trek like 2009.
We all went to the Discovery season 1 premiere together. Mike McMahon and the two of us.
Before any of us were working on
Star Trek. That's crazy. I used to write Star Trek zines with Mike. Like we go way back. So that's how Shax ended up in the book.
I was going to ask you about that.
We just called him and said, hey, can we have Shax? It was actually initially can we have Mariner? And he was like, you can't have Mariner, it's going to fuck with my backstory. which now that I see, I understand. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But it was after season 1, and he said, well, let me tell you what we're doing in season 2. And he told us about a bunch of stuff, and he told us about the DS9 episode. Mostly, I think, to brag about the fact that he got Armin Shimmerman back. And I was so jealous. And he was like, you brought in the teeth. And I was like, oh, that's amazing.
And then struggled with the teeth.
And then he said, hey, do you want to, you could use bridge crew, though. Do you want, do you want anybody? And we said, well, what are you doing with Shaxx? And he told us about DS9. And we were like, oh, that's what we're doing. We're just using Shaxx. That's the move. And that was all just a direct conversation with Mike. So that's how Star Trek works now. It's a community of like-minded nerds who all just want to make cool Star Trek. It's great.
Which, as a fan, is just exactly what I want to hear. It's just...
And I do want to say to your point, I say this a lot in interviews, so I apologize if other people have heard this before, but I think it's core Star Trek. Stories about ideas don't work. Stories about people do work, right? This is a quote from DC Fontana, like the original story editor of Star Trek, the person who got this thing working in the first place. I think she was like the thing that held that whole ship together when Gene Roddenberry would be constantly pissing off people and making them leave. You had this one thing at the center of it that was like, DC makes it work. And what she says a lot is this idea that you can't, to freelancers, she gave the memo a lot, which was like, stop making this about your science fiction concept. Figure out how this is about Kirk and Spock and Bones. If this is about Kirk and Spock and Bones, this will work. If this isn't about Kirk and Spock and Bones, it won't. And we put all of our stories through that test. Is this story about an idea? Is this story just about how cool the Pleroma is? Then it doesn't work. What the Pleroma arc is a chance for Cisco to look his mom in the face and have all of these other people be like, your mom is scary. And like, that's important. It's a chance for Beverly Crusher to look her son in the face and be like, what has happened to my son? It's a chance for Lily Sato to make a really dark choice
based on the legacy of her family.
Based on good ideas, and for Talir to reckon with both their own personal identity and their forgiveness for what Lily is doing. Like, everybody has like character story. Meanwhile, Data's off on a very personal journey in Annual, right? And then is swinging back into the book. Like, everything that we're doing is built first on character, and then the ideas are a nice scaffolding to support that. You know what I mean? But the characters are always going to be front forward for Star Trek.
And the thing that impresses me the most, I think, actually everything impresses me about this book when I read it, to be honest, but when you bring those characters in, when you bring Shaxx in, when you bring in people that we haven't seen kind of mix with some of the other legacy characters from the 90s shows, it never, ever feels like fan service to begin with. Thank you. But it also never feels forced.
But I appreciate that.
I know, but it doesn't feel like that. It's not palpable in the book. So, because clearly you are fans, how do you sit there and go, okay, I want to use this person, this person, this person, this person, but how do we decide when is the right time and who are the right people to bring in?
Great question. Obviously, it's, as Jack says, it's about character. It's also about story, right? Like, we had Liam Shaw come in, and
which was awesome.
And that was, right? But that was a vertical. It was like, we need a shipwright, we need an engineer, we need someone who's existing here who could fit this spot. And like, there's a lot of different people on the table, but you think of like, who is going to have the most emotional resonance here? Not necessarily the one that I want this guy. It's like, well, that guy might not be right for this because this other character is going to have a lot more emotional impact on what the actual scene is. So it's not necessarily about the narrative connectivity, but once again, it's about the emotional connectivity and who best is going to fit. And then, of course, yes, as fans, like, we're like, oh, we get to use X, Y, or Z, right? Like,
I think part of it is also there's we all started with a premise of like, I wish I had a better term for this, but like, use the whole animal. Like, we really wanted the idea to be, okay, if we're going to sit down and we're going to say, okay, every piece of Star Trek is sacred, every piece of Star Trek is canon, every piece of Star Trek matters, then whenever we can take something in, we should, but we need to recognize that we're not taking it in for a one-shot gag. If we ever do a one-shot gag that's like, this person you like, this person you like, this person you like, it'll be for a really specific purpose. We do not like doing that. What we want to do if we bring a character in is make sure that they are given time to shine and get something, like, get to actually be a thing. Really, one of the only characters I think we've actually properly done just to like blink and you'll miss it cameo with was Shinzon at the end of the Zenkethi arc. And we only brought Shinzon in because that is our only piece of direct linear connectivity to Nemesis, which is the next thing, right? In terms of the timeline, our book takes place right before Nemesis. And so we wanted to make sure that we didn't ignore that Nemesis was about to show up, that we were building some connectivity to it, that you understood how the Romulans got there, how it was going to happen. Like, Shinzon never needs to show up again. Shinzon doesn't need to be a big threat in the book. Yeah. We know how the Shinzon stuff happens. Yeah. It's in Nemesis. Do you want to know what happens at the end of that time? Go watch Star Trek Nemesis, exactly, right? Yeah. Like, that's what that's there for. But by and large, it's only if we can actually do something with the character that we bring them in.
Amazing. And then, I guess, that's almost in a way what I think for me, as a fan of Star Trek from the 90s, we always wanted with the era of Next Generation into DS9, into Voyager, because you never really got that huge amount of connectivity. You know, you had Barclay that would show up in Voyager every now and then, or
you
Troy.
You have Miles and you have Worf kind of bopping along, and obviously when Worf shows up on DS9, the entire show changes.
Yeah.
Right, and that's the kind of promise of what is effectively one of the oldest shared universes in modern narrative.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, you have to go back to like Arthur Conan Doyle to find like characters that were existing in their own kind of shared multiverse like that, or universe like that. Yeah. So it's the premise of it, and then we got it a little bit, but exactly. Like, once again, we are all the same.
Yeah.
That's what we wanted, and then we're so excited to be able to do it.
As I understand it, it actually was Brent Spiner's pitch. He's said in a few interviews, he was like, when we got done with the movies, my big pitch was start doing movies that use everybody. Yeah. Stop doing these as discrete Next Generation or DS9 or Voyager movies, and start doing just Star Trek movies that use everybody like the Avengers. And that was our pitch when we came in. Was like, just
bless you, Spiner.
Yeah, I didn't know that pitch to begin with. I heard that pitch after the fact, but it is. I think he was exactly right. I think it was a real missed opportunity for the franchise when all these actors were in their prime and ready to go. Yeah. To be like, well, we're not going to use all of them. And I think that's again why Picard 3 hit so hard, because Picard 3 came in and said, what if we did that?
Exactly.
Like, what if we treated this like a shared universe?
The thing that everybody has wanted forever.
We're going to Voyager and Next Generation kiss. Let's go. And it was a beautiful thing to see. I was as a DS9 fan, I felt like there was a ton of DS9 erasure, but that's fine. I'll live with it. They use the founders.
And if Paramount Plus does happen to be listening, Star Trek Legacy would be really nice.
Yeah.
So as a DS9 fan, kind of picking up on Sisko and seeing his mum and coming towards that point of his story and what happened with the wormhole and everything, do you feel the pressure of picking that up and kind of continuing what the show did?
I think weirdly, no. Only because the end, you're like, you disagree.
Yeah,
yeah.
You're feeling it.
Yeah. I felt it was actually really important to follow that up, because I love Deep Space Nine, but I do not like how Sisko ends. I tend to agree with Avery Brooks on this, that the character being yeeting out of his son's life after 7 years of effectively learning how to be a father and not a war leader, and that at the end of the day, what he chooses, and it does really seem like a choice, is to leave and go be in the wormhole for nebulous reasons that are not terribly well explained, always felt to me like a bit of a betrayal of the Jake Sisko arc that sits at the center of the book. Story. I think that idea that Jake ends the story by standing at that window and looking at that window, and that's going to be the rest of his life. Yeah. And we know from Visitor that it will be the rest of his life. And it's like, man, that's rough. I have a really hard time understanding that as the proper ending to Deep Space Nine, except as a tragedy, right? And then at the same time, we know from Lower Decks that he stays there. We know that Sisko doesn't come back.
Yeah.
He stays in the wormhole. So our book, which takes place between those two events, we are bound to certain canon now as a canonical book. Now we have to take him out and we have to put him back. Spoiler alert, right? We don't have a choice. We have to.
Yeah.
So given that we know we got to do that, how can we make that ending feel right to us? How can we take what felt to us as an ending, especially as young men with fathers who were often absent? How can we do this story that feels like it actually grapples with that theme, actually talks about that idea, and actually has Sisko come to a real character-centric ending on it? And we've now talked with Robert Hewitt Wolf and Ira Stephen Bear and all those guys about this. We were all on the strike line with them. I got to strike with Quark. It was awesome.
Yeah.
But we've gotten their blessing on this stuff. It's really released some of the stress on this, because even they are like, yeah, that probably should get followed up. And it's like, good, awesome, great, we're doing it. We know how we're doing it, and we've had the ending. We know the last page of Star Trek whenever it comes. We've known that last page since the first page.
Wow.
We've known how this book ends, because fortunately we were locked in that box. We had to know how it ended. So we had to figure out what's that little twist that we can do that's going to make the ending of Deep Space Nine. It's not going to invalidate the ending of Deep Space Nine, but it's going to make it work for us. And so that's, I look forward to being able to talk about that whenever that eventually happens.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat about Star Trek. Looking forward to the panel at the end of this weekend and what might be revealed.
Yeah, big reveals, big stuff. There's stuff even we don't know. We're gonna get surprised.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for watching, Super Friends. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button just down below and hit the bell so that you can get notified whenever we release brand new videos. In fact, there's 2 more waiting for you to watch right here below. So what are you waiting for? Why not click play?